Hello and welcome back to part 2 of this breaking down of a gender debate video. If you haven't listened to the first part, I recommend you do that first. And we're going to just go back a couple of questions from the end of the last video, because there's a couple of things I'd like to add to it. So enjoy the next, I guess, probably 45 minutes of me interjecting certain things regarding this very interesting conversation between two opposing opinions as regarding to gender and transitioning, etc. So here we go.
That's crazy. And then you would go into the methodology and then you would break down the data and you'd be like, wait, that's not actually what it shows. And in the study that you're referencing, if I remember correctly, if we're referencing the same study, they weren't actually able to see any kind of mental health or suicidal ideation difference in the two groups of people who transitioned and didn't transition. And again, we'll have to both look at that to make sure that we're looking at the same thing. I think the point is, though, that you're making is that there's competing data. And so what is the truth of it? And that does get complicated if you're looking at it from a perspective of, well, what just makes people happy?
Right.
What makes people feel good? And while of course that matters to me, it does. I don't want anyone committing suicide, no matter what they believe, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I agree with their choices or not. I don't want that. But I'm not only looking at it from that perspective.
So right here again, she is about to divulge that, well, look, let's listen to what she says. She's just basically invalidated most studies, either for or against people transitioning, etc., because she's said, well, it all depends on the data, and if you've got complete data and how it's analyzed, and if it's, well, I'm going to add this, if it's biased or not. And, you know, she kind of criticized what Desmond said as regards to the positive signs from surveys, etc., on people transitioning, particularly regarding suicide. But you know what? She never applied the same argument herself when she was quoting, slightly misquoting, the survey done from Sweden that I referenced in my first video. And I put a link down in the description below in my first video of why that is so. Someone pointed out the facts and the details of what was done in this survey and the conclusions they came to. So we have to be really careful here on both sides of the argument, because come the end of the day, there is inconclusive evidence. There's no empirical evidence either way. So what does she do? She has to rely on something else for her foundation on why she feels so strongly.
I'm looking at it from the perspective of biologically, there is male, there is female. It is actually impossible to change your sex.
So here she's already trying to clarify black and white. There's males and there's female, and you have to belong, and you do belong, even if you're intersex, into one of those buckets. Period. That's it. Wonder where she gets that from, huh?
We probably agree on that. It sounds, because you said biological
you can't
male.
Biologically,
so, yes,
you can certainly identify and can be respected, right? In my opinion.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that later, but you can't, we don't have that technology yet,
that's what perspective that I'm coming from. With those two biological realities, I think that they are important. I think they're amazing. I think men and women and boys and girls are supposed to complement one another, that being a boy, being a girl should be celebrated, that these are necessary distinctions for actually the existence of all human life. And taking someone down the journey of trying to identify as or be something that they biologically aren't is not just damaging for them, is damaging to the concept of truth as a whole, and is damaging to society when we'll get to that, when it looks at, women's sports and women's spaces and women's privacy, this blurring of the lines, this self-declaration, self-identification that I can be whatever I say that I am and my biology means nothing. I think it is absolutely destructive for society. So whether or not someone is happy about their transition is almost irrelevant to me.
Well, we are mammals, and there's a natural sexual variation to a single percentage. I'm not sure exactly what that is in all mammals, and humans are mammals too. But that's not something that she can accept because she has a different foundation from science.
Wow.
Okay, so I
Really
have
interesting
a really
points.
good question to go on after this one. Is sex assigned at birth, or is it established at conception and recognized before or after?
Oh,
You want to go?
Oh no.
I can go first, or you can go.
Oh no, you should go first.
Okay, you go, Allie.
Okay.
Oh god.
Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex has to do with your gametes and has to do with your chromosomes. Those things are really kind of intertwined. And of course, a woman or a female has large gametes. She produces ovaries, and a man produces sperm, testes. We've got X, we've got XY. All of these things are actually determined at the point of fertilization, at the point of conception, which is so incredible. And of course, there are abnormalities and there are different anomalies that people experience. But just because there are anomalies or disorders doesn't actually negate the sex binary. That is true at the cellular level. So a man has all XY chromosomes in every cell of his body except for like some of the sperm, which of course determines the sex when you're procreating. And then a woman has all female cells in her body. So down to the cellular level, from the point of conception, we are either male or female. Wow, that is so fundamental. And again, that we would try to mess with that cosmetically or hormonally, it's just always going to spell disaster. It's so obvious that science tells us so much of how things are supposed to be.
We're going to delve into this a little bit more later. But again, she's very much stuck on the flesh. In other words, you are what you are between your legs regarding sex and your other internal organs that you can't physically see. And that is not exactly correct because a little child that's born is not usually conditioned by the parents to their own identity, except for how they are raised. So that's the influence of society influencing the newborn, and as a newborn goes through the years. So you rarely find a child saying, I hear about boys and girls. Am I a boy or a girl? Let me look between my legs. Oh, I'm a boy. Oh, I'm a girl. Now I know what I am. It doesn't work that way. In fact, before they're even really aware of what body parts mean what, they identify in their brains and they express it in their brains as young as 2.5-year-old onwards, in actual fact. And this is where you find, and this is the word that we use for transgender, that the brain can identify more masculine or feminine in a certain small percentage of the population, as indeed it did and does with myself. But we'll go into that in a bit more depth a little bit later. This is something and a concept she is not willing to follow and listen to.
She is scientifically correct. I do have to say. So I think, and again, right, I try to come things as objective as possible, right? Sex is not determined at birth, nor is it assigned, right? You are fertilized. You basically have that XX or XY, about 2% of the population. We have the intersex. So I do think biologically a third gender kind of exists, but I mean, we don't say like red hair is a mutation, right? Red hair is another color, right? So intersex, I would say is a third biological sex, 2% of the population. We don't call redheads mutants and weirdos, right? No, they're a hair color. So is intersex.
I disagree with that, but I'll respond in a little bit.
That's totally fair. Almost irrelevant, right? That idea, in my opinion, but that idea of, yes, you're scientifically, in my opinion, you are correct. With that said, I think that there is a kind of kindness and fairness that comes with saying what you were assigned at birth, because when you are born, you are all of a sudden given expectations when you are declared a boy or you're declared a girl or you're declared intersex, right? And that's what really matters. And I think if we as a society were kinder and more open to people being able to be themselves, then we could just say, oh, you're this, you're that, you're the other, right? But I think that idea of saying, oh, like I say, I was assigned male at birth, right? Because when I was born, that's when the expectations started. And I'm not saying that biologically on, first contact sperm and egg meet that I wasn't biologically coded as XY chromosomes, because I was, you're right. But there was also a societal expectation placed on me when I was given the bubblegum blue cigar as a kid. And that's why I think that, yes, scientifically you're accurate. And I think that anyone who has any science background can't argue with you when it comes to that. I don't necessarily know if we need to be so forceful though. And we can just compromise and say, yes, biologically, everyone kind of is coded for a certain gender. Let's say assigned at birth, because that's societally what's relevant. And that's where I come from. But I would love to hear your opinion, and also about the intersex thing too.
Sure. I guess I can say the intersex thing first. So the intersex is just, like you said, it's an aside. It's kind of a tangent from our main point. But I will say, like, intersex, I kind of think it's a misnomer, because many times people who have so-called intersex conditions like Turner syndrome or something, they are still male or female. They just have some kind of hormonal abnormality, or sometimes it's a chromosomal abnormality. I would not call it a third gender, because there are so many different diagnoses within this umbrella of intersex. Again, there are some intersex conditions that only affect females. There are some intersex conditions that only affect males. And so I would think it was wrong to say that it is some kind of third gender. And I also think, I'm not saying you're doing this, but sometimes they're used as kind of like a scapegoat and a front for transgender ideology, when really a man identifying as a woman has nothing to do with someone who has an intersex condition.
And this is where I totally disagree, because she has negated the biggest sex organ in the human body, the brain. Think about it. All sexual activity, excitement, ingenuity, everything is controlled by the control center. And I can tell you, sex isn't going to mean anything if your brain isn't there in that place thinking about it. And so, I can't remember what she said now. I'm going to have to look at it again. Hold on. Okay, so yes, it has everything to do with intersex. And this is intersex of the brain, the forming and the functioning of the brain. And I'll go into more detail later, but she doesn't go there. In fact, Desmond doesn't go there either. And that's kind of a little sad, because she can just turn around and talk about ideologies. Something you've concocted in your mind and other people agree with it, but it really doesn't exist. And that's her point of view. One sec.
Someone who was born with a chromosomal abnormality, most people who are identifying as the opposite sex, so-called transgender, don't have a chromosomal abnormality, so they don't need to be a part of the conversation. That's my take on that. As far as assigned at birth, I think language is really important. And because you acknowledged that scientifically it is correct that from the moment of conception, you are, unless you have one of those abnormalities, XX or XY.
Well, not at the moment of conception. It takes a little bit longer, but the idea is like, yeah, but you rolled it. I'm sorry to interrupt.
From the beginning.
But like from the fairly beginning, because technically it's not quite demonstrated until a couple of weeks in, but yes.
Okay. So maybe in that time, that is some time that little fertilized egg can identify as something else. But after that, they're either XX or XY. And so this idea that you are assigned something, it sounds very arbitrary. So you're saying that this doctor has the authority to basically look at someone's genitalia and say, I don't know, I'm just going to assign you boy, assign you girl, as if we haven't known for all of human history that we were sexually dimorphic and that there is male, there is female. You can observe that from the outside. And so we're not assigned this. That's just not the correct word. And I know you care about the preciseness of language.
Because so this is how we're interpreting it differently. Because I think to myself, well, saying I was assigned male at birth gives people leeway, and it takes into consideration the social implications. And I think that it's more respectful to kind of say, oh yeah, well, this is what you were considered. But you almost see that as almost making it frivolous. Like your gender was this arbitrary, random thing that someone just declared one day. I so see that perspective, and I've never understood that before. Thank you for explaining that to me. Yeah. I don't agree with you, but I get it.
Yeah, I just think it's like inaccurate language. And I think someone's sex is so fundamental to who they are. And I also think it's important to separate like stereotypes from sex. Like you were saying, okay, you were called boy at birth. That's kind of what you said. And that you were then, all these expectations were placed on you. And while I do think some societal expectations are directly correlated to someone's sex and they're fine, not all of them are. And so I think that we can say, okay, not all stereotypes about men, women, boys, girls are helpful, but that doesn't mean that sex is arbitrary and we need to use language like assigned.
Well, I think you have a good point. And I think, again, I really appreciate your perspective. I do have to say, and you know, I'll also like look at your content because every once in a while I do get a little bit confused on, I guess maybe your terminology, like that idea of like, well, only some intersex conditions only affect men. I'm like, well, they're intersex, right? Or you know what I mean? Like that. To me,
that's why it's a misnomer. That's
like,
why
I don't really understand your point.
I don't like the word intersex.
So what would you consider? So, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. No,
okay. Okay. So that idea of like, so what would you consider then if someone is an XXY, right? Like, what do you consider male and female? Is it the genitalia? Is it the chromosomes? Is it the estrogen and testosterone levels? Like, what is male and female to you?
No, I think it's probably a combination of a lot of those things. It really comes down to gametes. That's what most biologists would probably say. It comes down to gametes and it comes down to chromosomes. And yes, of course, there are people that have anomalies. Like I said, they have the chromosomal abnormalities. I don't think, like you said, there's some mutant or there's some freak. As a Christian, I would say they're made in the image of God and they have just as much value as anyone else. But in the same way that there are people that are born with one leg, I'm not going to stop saying humans have two legs. Right. I'm not going to stop saying that humans are bipeds. We understand that humans are bipeds, and the existence of someone who is born with one leg doesn't negate that fact. And that person isn't any less valuable, but they're born with one leg, but we say people have two legs and we're fine with that as a rule.
Oh, wait, we say people always have two legs?
We would say if someone asked you, hey, do human beings have one or two legs? You would say, oh, humans have two legs. You would say they're bipeds, right? Like that's a rule. Like we have two legs. We're meant to have two legs. We're supposed to have two legs, right?
Okay. So like if someone said to you, for example, like, you know, how many legs can a human being be born with? Would you say only two?
I would say they're supposed to have two.
Supposed to have two. Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
in the same way that you're supposed to have XX or XY, but things happen. I would use the language like we live in a fallen world. And so there is sickness, there is brokenness. Things aren't always how they're supposed to be.
And so the comment of fallen world is, again, where our foundation is, which is a very evangelical, traditional, conservative interpretation of biblical scripture, often taken from the Old Testament, from the Torah, and where God made man in his own image, male and female, he made them. And so that's where her whole foundation is. And so she has to place any variation, like intersex, in light of that. So she can't, in our own mindset and conditioning, allow for, wow, there are intersex of various kinds, and they are neither male nor female. It's just things that happened since the fall, no fault of their own. It wasn't like they went and had surgery to be intersex. It just kind of, that's how they were born. But nevertheless, they're still male or female, and she never answers Desmond's questions. What about if someone has, and I've met people like this, have XXY chromosomes throughout their body, which is both a male version and a female version. If you look at it put together, what are they? In God's eyes, or in medical science eyes, are they men or women? Are they male or female? And she never answers that.
But that doesn't negate the rule.
I see your point. So do you think, this is why I always get in trouble, because I know I'm like supposed to be like debating against it, because just for the record, I do significantly disagree with that perspective, but I'm more interested in how you're thinking about it. Do you feel like that somewhat erases an identity of 2% of the population? Like, what about those? It just, to me, I am not intersex, right? I think you had a really solid point there. That idea of like, I am non-binary, if that helps you understand who I am. And if not, then I'm a guy that likes to wear makeup, whatever the heck works for you, honey. But that idea of I have nothing to do with intersex, and I shouldn't take the intersex population and use them to justify why I put on makeup every day. That's such a valid point. But to the intersex population, I don't know. I mean, if you were intersex and you just heard how I described it, being like, oh yeah, they're a significant population and they're valid, and how you described it being like, well, there is something wrong with them, it's like having one leg, would you feel validated or justified as you as a human being, or would you feel a little bit sad? And I mean, if you were intersex, how would you like to be described, by you or me, in this situation?
Well, I think you've placed them under one umbrella to say that all intersex people are a third gender, when really it is an umbrella for all different kinds of anomalies and disorders. Many times that requires surgery, requires medication in a very different way. I have to take medication for my thyroid. I can say that the thyroid is supposed to function one way. It's supposed to produce the right levels of T3, T4. It's supposed to have those levels. Mine doesn't. And so I have to take medication to fix that. But it's okay for a doctor to say to me, you know what, this is how the thyroid is supposed to function. Yours doesn't function that way. I was born that way, whatever it was, it doesn't function that way. And so you need something to help. Those people are not less valid as human beings, but I think that they were probably diagnosed at some point with the kind of anomaly. So it's not me saying, wow, you're so different. Probably a doctor told them, yeah, you see how everyone has XXXY? Here's what's going on with your chromosomes. We'll figure it out. It's okay. You're a human being made in the image of God. You're awesome. But again, using them, which I'm not saying you're doing, but using them to try to say, see, there's not two genders. There's so many genders, or there's three genders. That is just using them as kind of like a front or a mascot. And they were born a particular way. People who wear makeup or identify as the opposite sex were not.
She clearly shows she doesn't understand the human brain. For people such as myself called transgender, it's a form of, if you want, intersex of the brain, an anomaly of the brain, where there is some variation in the brain structure and certainly in the function, because there's still a lot to be learnt about the structure of the brain, but I'll go into that at a later date as well. But the functioning of the brain is omitted from this whole discussion here, and it really should be included.
It's totally different.
Totally different.
In my perspective.
Totally different. So, okay, question. Can I ask you a question? And then I want to involve you too.
No,
I know, we're just like
you. Oh my gosh, right?
Literally, I feel like you need no moderating.
Like,
you
oh
guys
my gosh,
are so good.
You're so funny. But I guess the question comes to mind of, okay, how do I frame this properly? Okay, I'll ask you up front, because do you believe there's a difference between biological sex and gender?
I was just going to ask the question.
I ruined it.
No, you did not. I was actually just going to ask, not specifically in that way, but I was going to say, what is a boy and what is a girl?
Yeah, because what you said was like, well, using intersex doesn't justify that there's a third gender. I'd be like 1,000%, because there's an infinite amount of genders because of societal expectations, right? But biologically, there tends to be 2 on average, sometimes 3. We disagree on that point, agree to disagree. But to me, also, gender is completely different because that's a societal performance that we put on. Right?
But it's kind of interesting because so you're saying gender and sex are different, which I'll definitely address that, because you're right, we should define our terms here. But at the same time, you said intersex is a third gender, which is interesting because we're talking about something biological.
No, biological gender. Yeah, I try. My apologies if I ever kind of misspeak on that. I always try to be very specific about if I'm talking about biological gender or gender, right? Biological sex or gender, because to me those are two different things. Biologically, XY chromosome, male assigned at birth, male, and what is it? 8th week, you kind of get your determined sex as an egg, right? Something like that. I'll look up the research, right? But I'm male, right? But to me, sex and gender are totally different. And I think I get very interested when people say that they're not, because it's one of those things that, in my opinion, like you can Google, like you can get entire majors in this.
You can Google a lot of things and major in a lot of things that are not true.
Okay, that's okay.
And you probably would agree with that.
I would agree with that. But so okay, can I ask you a question off your question? Is there a difference between biological sex and gender? And if you don't think so, but other people think so, is there a reason to tell them they're wrong?
I love this question. I love this question. Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much. I'm not going to be able to like get in within my 2 minutes. I'm not going to be able to answer the whole thing. So let's go back and forth.
Literally, I could just walk away right now. Goodbye. Go ahead.
Let me answer the first part of that question of like, is there a difference between gender and sex? And so if we look at this concept of separating gender and sex, this is not historically normal. Actually, if you go back to John Money and Alfred Kinsey and Judith Butler and kind of the origins of the ideology of queer theory back in the 60s and 70s.
I am so glad that she's going here. Can't wait to rebuttal this one. Hold on.
That concept of separating sex from gender. John Money loved to champion this. He thought that gender really was something that was nurtured. So even if you had male chromosomes, you could be nurtured into being a female. And of course, his infamous experiment on the Reimer twins, one of the boys who had a botched circumcision, John Money told the parents, said, just raise him as a girl named Barbara. He'll be totally fine.
That didn't work out, did it?
No. And it was awful. And there's so many things within that. John Money sexually molested those two boys, but then also this young boy who was raised a girl and put on estrogen knew his whole life, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, even though he had female parts. And his family finally told him, yeah, you're a man. He knew it his whole life. Anyway, both of those boys ended up committing suicide, but John Money was an awful, awful person. So was Alfred Kinsey, just a champion of things that I know that you and I both would agree are just disgusting and egregious. And both of them also, though, champion this idea that sex and gender are different, that gender is conditioned, gender is declared, gender is chosen, and sex is different. I do not agree with separating those two things.
Here, she made my point exactly. Even if a person's genitals and they are raised opposite to who they are, in this case, a boy had surgery before they were aware of it, and they were raised a girl, and they always knew that they were a boy. Well, where did that come from? Did that little boy look between his legs and say, oh, I'm a girl? I had girl parts, but no. I had girl parts but says I'm a boy. Where did that identity come from? In the brain. And it goes to prove that the brain is stronger than the flesh. The brain is more accurate than the genitals. Anything physical which determines biological sex. And this is my point exactly. That the brain is formed enough before that baby is born to know its identity. And it's a matter then of getting in touch with that identity of who you are as regards to sex if you know there's something different about you. Just as I did, I just didn't know what it was through my whole childhood. I knew I was different. I got teased because I acted a little bit a certain way and acted a bit another way, and I quickly learned not to. And then I learned by watching boys how to be a typical boy, and I didn't really think that much about it, but ever so often, this female urge would keep coming back, and I would do it shamefully, quietly, or fight against it, through all my life, going through to my adult life, till I finally had a revelation of who I am. And so this is not in physical gonads, it's not in your chromosomes, this is in your brain and the functioning and the formation and the structure of the human brain. The Money experiment proves this beautifully.
Of course, someone may not fit particular stereotypes of a man. Maybe you don't like all the things traditionally men do. Same thing for girls. For example, when I was growing up, I only wanted to wear jeans and a white t-shirt. I had two older brothers. I had a weird snakes phase where I loved snakes and bugs. I probably would have loved the centipede that we were talking about earlier. And so, yeah, that probably wasn't traditional. My mom hated, I didn't want to wear dresses and bows, but I wasn't any less a girl. And a boy who might like ballet or might like pink isn't any less a boy. And I do not believe in separating those categories because our bodies tell us more about who we are than our feelings. And that's probably where we disagree.
And here is yet another Christian ideology that they have to use the word feelings. because feelings come and go, and they're trivial, and they're here and there. They're flighty, and if you feel like you're a woman, but you've got male gonads and probably male chromosomes, then sorry, your feelings are telling you a lie. That's wrong. But it's more than feelings. It is a deep inner identity of who you are. It's not a formed belief system. In fact, you have to work through your belief system like I did. I was conditioned and totally believed I was a man. And it took me years, and actually help from God, which you wouldn't like to hear, but I might give that story in a later episode, of how I came to terms and discovered who I really was. And then the physical process of working that out, in which I'm in over 12 years now. And so she's missed it. She negates, again, the structure and the functioning of the brain. Oh, well.
That you might believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that how you feel or what you declare, how you identify is more important than your sex, is more important than your chromosomes. And I disagree with that. I think our body tells us who we are. We don't get to tell our body who it is.
I love this. First of all, love that. Second of all, I'm so happy you brought this theory up. Third of all, for everyone that always hates me, because everyone, I don't know if you know this on social media, everyone hates me, right? Because the conservatives hate me because I'm this, and then a lot of the liberals hate me because I'm willing to listen.
Well, he's a very likable person.
You are
He's
so
very
likable.
Thank you.
Are you kidding me?
I love how you brought up this study, right? Because I always find myself interpreting it in the exact opposite way you just interpreted it. Are you ready for this? Okay. Let's see if you can hear
I've heard this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's see if you can understand my perspective on this, because to me, this is wild, but I see that idea of you botched the circumcision. It was actually a boy, and you raised her as a girl, and you treated her like a girl, and you even gave her estrogen, right? You made her body a girl. You made her a girl. You physically manipulated her into being a girl, gave the hormones as a girl, and treated her like a girl. And she knew she was a boy. Her feelings knew.
Because of her biology.
No, because you said because we know
estrogen doesn't change your biology.
What biology?
Her chromosomes, and
her chromosomes don't talk.
You know. I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
I do,
you know
but
that I'm not saying that the chromosomes are physically saying,
right? I know
I'm
what you
a
mean.
boy.
So I apologize.
But he knew who he biologically was. It wasn't that he was always really a girl and he just felt like a boy. It was that he might have had girl parts, but he knew that he was biologically, chromosomally, actually a man. And so I'm saying that you cannot run away from your biology, no matter how you change your outward appearance.
Right. So I think, so it's so interesting because, again, I think the terminology is like so important because you're like, I don't trust feelings. But to me, isn't that a feeling? Like the biology, the chromosomes affect the amount of, right? The chromosomes are going to affect the thyroid, the pituitary gland. That's going to affect the amount of hormones that you have, right? You get a boy, botch the circumcision, turn the penis into a vagina, give him the estrogen, treat him like a girl. You do everything female, including from the very kind of hormone levels. What is left making him think he's a boy?
Before she goes on about nature versus nurture, it's the person's brain. His brain, which is the control center for a human body, knew who he was because it was formed male in the womb. Its identity was what he formed there. It had nothing to do with the nurturing and his physical parts, because once he was born, everything pointed to female. But his brain knew that he was a boy against everything that was done, even unknowingly, to him. It proves my point exactly. The brain, the human brain, is genderized.
Nature versus nurture.
Sorry.
He knew his nature.
Okay. So would you say that's a feeling?
based on reality. The difference
Okay.
between,
What is-
I think
yeah.
the difference between someone who is, say, born a girl and thinks that she is a boy, that her feeling is based on something that isn't true. It's not true. It's not true at the cellular level. It's not true in her body. She's feeling in the same way that I can't say I identify as a tree. Now, maybe you would respect my pronouns if I said I identify.
Okay, we're going to continue this in the next episode. Thank you for listening. And episode 3 will come up sometime fairly soon. Take care.